Welcome to Lecture 27 of our series on prosody. In previous lectures, we've explained a lot about the nature and uses of prosody, but how can we use this knowledge as teachers or coaches to help people communicate better? I'll start with some general principles and then later discuss the needs of specific populations. First up, let's be honest about how hard this is. The successful use of prosody involves a lot of mental operations, as discussed in the previous lecture. Here's just a few. Now, some of these are malleable, others less so. Some people, as learners, come to us with brains that are superbly capable of learning new prosodic facts and skills, others much less so. Some brains may already be rigidly tuned to the behavior patterns of some other language. But still, teaching can often make a huge difference. What do learners need? Well, one essential is awareness of the importance of prosody. People are very familiar with the importance of learning words, having large vocabulary, and mastering complex grammar in order to sound educated, but awareness of the importance of prosody is less common. Maybe sharing ideas back from Lecture 2 of our series can help. Then there are the facts of how prosody works in its various functions. But in general, I think the focus needs to be on the skills, starting with perception and production skills, each with at least 3 components. We've already said a lot about each component. For the low-level features in Lectures 3 through 8, for the phonological and structural aspects of prosody in Lectures 10 through 12, and for prosody in the service of pragmatic functions in Lectures 21 through 23. Okay, but even if your production skills and perception skills are top-notch, for speaking and for listening, there is the challenge of interaction. Using prosody in interaction is where it all comes together. You need to put all these component skills together and learn to perform them at speed and under the stress of having a real conversation with a live interlocutor. Interaction skills are hard to teach and even harder to provide good feedback on. Also, a word on the issue of fear, the fear of messing up. We'll say more about that in a bit. Okay, so how do we teach prosody? Many techniques. To mention a few key factors, first, it's important to give clear explanations. And for this, good visualizations help enormously. Back in Lecture 13, we had a few ideas there. And second, tons of practice with specific tailored feedback. Very hard to do, yeah. Nobody ever said teaching was easy. All right, so some comments and anecdotes on the needs of native speakers and then of non-native speakers. Now, native speakers are generally thought to be, sort of by definition, competent in their language, but ability levels do vary, especially for prosody. So people like to be taught how to give more effective speeches. Public speaking is a huge area of demand. Now, many of us aspire to be like the great noble speakers. Steve Jobs is often held up as a paragon. And the benefits of being a great speaker are quantifiable in dollars. Prosody is known to be a major component of this. The work by Oliver Niebuhr, the great phonetician, has been breaking down some of the aspects of this. And he's using these findings to help people, starting with businessmen, improve their prosody, mostly the paralinguistic aspects, to achieve more charisma and other good outcomes. Now, in the grand scheme of things, teaching public speaking skills is comparatively easy, since the situations are so constrained and the goals so clear. Not so for the more free-form styles of interaction, where the uses of prosody are more varied. So job interviews, effective listening, active listening in the workplace and in relationships, and so on. Now, there are teachers and coaches willing to help, but for most of us, improving in these areas requires observation, self-observation and reflection, and maybe trial and error. But you do have to be careful. So Deborah Tannen, the great social linguist, is famous for always telling her students in her graduate seminar, when you observe language in the wild, it's okay to observe yourself, but don't observe yourself when you're talking to somebody you really care about. So the story is that her first book describes some interaction differences that she observed between her own conversational culture and her husband's. A great book. We all have a lot to learn from it, but in the course of making those observations, the story is she lost track of the actual individual, and the marriage didn't survive. So her loss, our gain, but use caution. Okay, for non-native speakers, Well, they also need help with prosody. One reason is sheer intelligibility. Beyond just getting the phonemes pronounced right, using proper prosody really helps people understand you. Beyond that, having no accent or minimal accent may be important. Interestingly, judgments of unaccentedness correlate with the accuracy of word stress placement in English and pitch range wideness. Okay. Further, if you're not just giving classroom presentations or speeches, there are the social dimensions of prosody, the pragmatic aspects, and these can be confused with the paralinguistic ones. So an interesting story is the original work by Gumpers, where he was called in to consult on a workplace dispute. So the workers in a certain organization were complaining that the management had hired cafeteria servers who were deliberately rude to them. So this was an industrial, a little crisis. So he went in and said, well, why are they rude to you? What is exactly the problem? It turns out the servers in the cafeteria, when they were offering side dishes, would offer them with falling intonation. Potatoes, gravy, which was polite in the South Asian language that they came from, but in English seems like a rude, take it or leave it kind of thing. So a misunderstanding of the pragmatic function of prosody was misinterpreted as a paralinguistic attitude issue. Okay, so why do non-natives fail just to talk like natives? Why is it so hard? Well, there's lots of reasons. First, of course, there are the habits from your native language. There may also be powerful associations to overcome. The famed Dutch prosodist, Carlos Geuzenhoven, has the most elegant British English. Sitting in on his class in Berkeley, I enjoyed just listening to his voice, British with a faint European overlay. But one day in a discussion of pitch range, he suddenly shifted to 100% English native voice. And the difference, he told us, is the pitch range. Now I'm speaking with a much wider pitch. It's wider in English than in Dutch, but to me that sounds gay, so. And he resumed his normal European-style voice. A lot of things to unpack there. Finally, there is fear. And this is justified. So if you get the pronunciation wrong, people will think you're just a foreigner and they'll forgive you. But as we've already seen, if you get the prosody wrong, they might think you have a bad attitude. And some learners adopt risk-free monotone voices, which works, but it's limiting socially. I find a good trick in the classroom is to try and set up a safe experience where people feel okay to experiment. Deliberately structuring the exercises around childish games like Marco Polo or even peekaboo frees up the student to be playful and forget their fears. So here's kind of a generic lesson plan for teaching pragmatics-related prosody, and you'll find some resources at nigelward.com/prosody. So overall, despite the challenges, I think we can be upbeat about the prospects for teaching prosody and, by doing so, empowering individuals, helping them strengthen their relationships, and improve communication across cultures. Okay, that wraps it up for thoughts about teaching prosody. In the next lecture, we'll see some historical context, how teaching prosody and researching prosody has progressed over the centuries, but how some old ideas are still holding us back.